Char Miller joins me now from Claremont, California. He's a professor of environmental analysis and history at Pomona College. Professor, will be felt deeply in the next 30 years, part of this report. You're in the state of California, which has experienced devastating wildfires. What do you make of this leaked draft report?
Well, this report is about as shocking as any report I've read has been. It's not that the information is new. It is the urgency with which this information is reported. And they do one other thing that they've never done before, which is to start to enumerate who and where are going to suffer the most. Environmental justice advocates will say, well, of course, the poor, those who have the least impact on our carbon footprint are going to suffer the most. They identify the numbers, hundreds of millions of people who may find themselves short on water, agricultural areas that might be toast as a consequence of our inaction. And the third thing I would say is that although this comes as a way to set up the COP meeting up in Glasgow, I actually read it as a critique of the G7 meetings earlier this month, in which, once again, the leaders said, yeah, we really need to do something, and here's $100 million that will commit to this, or $100 billion, excuse me. It's the exact same number they used 12 years ago, and that tells us how little has happened, how little has changed, and I think this report is going to force us to act, or as the report says, we will barely survive as opposed to thriving.
Yeah, one quote, the worst is yet to come, affecting our children and grandchildren's lives more than our own. Is it too late then for transformational change to turn this all around? Will this dire warning move anyone?
Well, that's the hope, obviously. The problem with transformational change is that it's transformational. It requires people to start to think about themselves in different ways than they have, and for societies to do that wholesale, and for governments to say, look, we need to stop the kind of actions and behaviors that we have manifest since at least World War II. The consumer society that has produced all of this energy up into the sky, the anthropogenic powers that are driving climate change. I mean, we need to stop at full stop right now. And I don't see the government anywhere in the world that's doing that.
Well, how do you think this report will shape climate conversations among scientists and governments right now? You mentioned G7 just several days ago, and COP26 coming up later on this year. Will this be discussed?
Oh, I think it has to be. I mean, in COP26 in Glasgow, if they don't reference this and if they don't act in response to this, they are actually doing precisely what this draft report warns us against doing, which is delay, dithering, coming up with half solutions. I hang out with geologists way too much, and they have been saying for the last decade, it is already irreversible. We now have much bigger evidence, I think, of this process, and it seems to me that if we don't act, if COP26 once again sets an agenda for the next COP and doesn't really do much, we know what the consequences are going to be.
Great to hear your take. Professor Char Miller, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.